Hello, boys and girls. Today we will be reading The Berenstain Bears and the Sitter. The authors and illustrator of our story are Stan and Jan Berenstain. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this story. "What's this?" said Papa Bear as he took the day's mail from the Bear family's mailbox. It was an important notice telling them about a meeting that night at the Bear Country Town Hall. Mama Bear called up Grizzly Gran. Brother and Sister Bear sometimes stayed with Grans and Gramps when Mama and Papa Bear had to be away. But Gramps and Gran were planning on going to the meeting too, so Brother and Sister couldn't stay with them. So Mama Bear called Aunt Maud and Cousin Wilbur, but they were going to the meeting as well. "Why can't we go with you?" asked Sister, beginning to get a little upset. "Yeah," added Brother Bear. "Because," said Papa, "this meeting is for grown-ups, and besides, it won't be over until late, way past your bedtime." "Well, where are we going to stay?" the cubs wanted to know. "You're going to stay right here," said Mama, as she put down the phone. "Alone?" asked Sister. "Of course not," said Mama. "I've arranged for a sitter." "A sitter?" said Brother. "Who's it going to be?" Sister asked. "Mrs. Grizzle, who lives in the hollow stump at the end of the road," said Mama, feeling much better about the whole thing. "Mrs. Grizzle!" said the cubs, not feeling any better at all. Once, when Sister was playing with her friends, their ball went into Mrs. Grizzle's flower garden. Mrs. Grizzle wasn't too happy about it at all. She had beautiful flowers, and Sister Bear was smushing them. And another time, when Brother was flying his red kite, it swooped and bumped Mrs. Grizzle on the hat. She wasn't too tickled about that either. Later that evening, after the supper things had been cleaned up, Mama and Papa got ready to go to the town meeting. "But who's going to scrub our backs, read us a story, and tuck us in?" asked Sister, still a little nervous about the idea of a sitter. "I understand that Mrs. Grizzle has raised 7 cubs of her own," said Mama, putting on her yellow hat. "And I'm sure she's a perfectly good back scrubber, story reader, and tucker-inner." "She's not going to scrub my back," Brother Bear said under his breath. Mrs. Grizzle came walking up the path to the Bear's treehouse right on time. There was no question about it. It was the same Mrs. Grizzle who got bopped with the kite and didn't like cubs tromping on her flowers. She was very large, almost as big as Papa, and she carried a drawstring bag. "Evening, all," said Mrs. Grizzle in a loud, jolly voice. "Well, time's a-wasting, you two," she said to Mama and Papa. "You better skedaddle off to your meeting." Mrs. Grizzle had a strong way of saying things, and folks usually did what she said. Mama and Papa kissed the cubs good night and skedaddled. "Phew," said Mrs. Grizzle as she sat down in Papa's big chair. "It sure is good to get a load off your feet," she said as she took off her hat and looked into her drawstring bag. There's something about somebody looking into a bag that makes cubs very curious. "Mrs. Grizzle?" said Sister. "Yes?" What's in the bag?" "Nothing much, just some things I take along when I go sittin'. A piece of string, a pack of cards." Meanwhile, over at the town hall, the Bears were getting ready for their important meeting. They were getting ready for speeches, voting, and arguments about some new laws. But Mama's mind was not on the meeting. Neither was Papa's. Mom and Papa Bear were thinking about what was going on back home. "Sister looked a little worried when we left," fretted Mama. "So did Brother," agreed Papa. So they decided to call home and see how things were going. Things are going just fine, said Mrs. Grizzle. Brother and sister can't come to the phone right now. They're busy playing cat's cradle. Have a good meeting, shouted the cubs. But they say to have a good meeting. After cat's cradle, they played Go Fish with the cards that came out of Mrs. Grizzle's drawstring bag. Then they played Tiddlywinks with a special set of winks that Mrs. Grizzle had made out of polished stones and a snail shell cup. After a while, the cubs got the yawns, and Mrs. Grizzle began getting them ready for bed. And she did indeed turn out to be a very good back scrubber. Brother changed his mind about not having his back scrubbed. And she was a very fine story reader and a really super tucker-inner. I hope Mama and Papa had a good meeting, said Sister with a yawn, because we had a very good sit. The cubs had a number of different sitters from time to time, but Mrs. Grizzle was their favorite, and they were always glad to see her. All right, boys and girls, I hope you enjoyed this reading of The Berenstain Bears and the Sitter. If you would like to add this book to your collection, I'll have it linked down below in the description box. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any uploads that I add. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you again soon in a couple of days with a new read aloud. Bye-bye!